Hey
everybody,
everyone!
it's time for a new What We Read episode.
That is right, because we've apparently been reading still.
Yeah, we've read a lot since the last time we sat down and filmed a bunch of these.
Yeah, and I must have broken my reading slump because I'm actually reading novels now. No pictures this time.
Congratulations! Well, maybe there are pictures for this particular.
Well, there's still going to be a ton of graphic novels on top of stuff, but for the first time in a while I'm going to be talking about actual books, so...
Awesome. So am I kicking things off as usual?
You're always kicking things off.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about today is not a book, it's a novella. It's called The Empress of Salt and Fortune, and this is by Nebo. So this is the first, and I think it's going to be a quartet of novellas. I think only 2 are currently out at the moment. So this is written in the style of a character telling their story to another character. Okay. So it's like the author is writing them talking about another person's story, which I actually don't mind so much, but it has to be executed in a way that I find engaging, and I think it was done very well in this novel. It is basically about the rise of the Empress Inyo, and a handmaiden that this Empress had is the one who is telling this story. So I'm not going to get into much detail because I feel like a lot of that comes out as you're reading this novella, and it's pretty short. The one thing I will say is that you kind of get thrown into this world right away from the start, and it's a little confusing. I imagine it would probably be easier to digest if you were reading it physically or digitally. I actually listened to the audiobook, so for a while I was like slowly processing it, and I had to like rewind a little bit and like re-listen to parts just so I could get a grasp of what was going on and the setting and everything like that. But it was so fascinating, and the detail that was woven into the story was quite rich considering how short it is. I like that it felt very much like a complete story and saga on its own, but at the same time you can tell that there's more to be unearthed when it comes to this world. Maybe not these characters, maybe it's going to be a different character in the next book, I don't know. I haven't actually read the next novella yet, but for what it was extremely fascinating. It was a quick listen. I think the narrator did a great job just like telling the story of someone telling a story. So I really enjoyed my experience with that. It was my first experience with this author's work, and I definitely look forward to checking out more of her stuff, including the next couple of books in this quartet, as well as her novel that she recently had one that came out that is like an alternate take on The Great Gatsby, which sounds absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to read that. The next book I'm going to talk about is Klara and the Sun, which is by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is actually the first novel I've ever read from this author. It definitely won't be the last though. So the premise of this one is that Klara is essentially an artificial friend. So she is constructed to, you know, meet the needs of whichever kid or person chooses her as a companion. And she happens to be a model that is very observant and cognizant of the world around her. And so when she finally gets chosen by someone, she does everything in her power to be the best possible friend to that person. And that kind of takes her down an unexpected journey. And I thought this one was so interesting. I've never encountered his writing style before, so I don't really know what to expect from it. I think a lot of other people who have read his other works maybe went into this one expecting similarities to those things, and for me, since I was, you know, coming in with a clean slate, I just thought it was interesting. There isn't really much for me to like personally connect with because Klara is written in a way that feels a little bit detached. Obviously, she's an artificial friend, so like it's an interesting exploration of whether or not, you know, constructs like that can have feelings, and if the feelings are genuine, and whether or not they're just parroting like what they see or experience, or, you know, observe. Like Klara is very observant, so whatever she observes. So I just found it to be really interesting thematically. In terms of this story, I think if you are sort of familiar with like sci-fi or even just light sci-fi, if you watch shows like Black Mirror, for instance, or anything very similar to that, you'd probably be able to guess where the story is going, except that this also incorporates a tiny bit of sort of like, it feels like magical realism almost, because there's like a fantastical element to it. Very, very mild. All of that is very mild. I enjoyed it for what it was. I did not really have any issues with it, although there are a lot of like different things going on in the story that are definitely questionable morally. For sure. But I found it fascinating. It did take me a little longer to read than I anticipated. It's not very long, but the way it's written, I felt like I was, you know, slowly immersing myself in it, and it didn't feel like I could rush my way through this story, which is not a bad thing per se. I'm just, you know, letting you guys know in case you decide to pick it up for yourselves. I definitely enjoyed my first experience with his work. I do look forward to checking out his other stuff. I'm particularly interested in reading Never Let Me Go. I've never seen the movie, I've never read the book, and I also want to read The Remains of the Day, which are two very different genres and types of stories for him. But yeah, I can see why a lot of people enjoy his work. I can see why he gets lauded by a lot of critics as well, because he just does a very interesting job of telling a simple story but exploring themes that feel very relevant and very relatable. So definitely a good first experience.
Sure.
All right, it's your turn.
Oh, wonderful. Well, so I went on a Mark Miller verse binge, and for those of you who may or may not be familiar, Mark Miller has sort of written a lot of sort of like ultra-violent, ultra-edgy graphic novels. Some of it, sort of, if anyone's watched the movie Kick-Ass, you know, with hit, you know, like Chloe Moretz played
So that style.
Hit Girl, that style, that genre of just unapologetic, just insane, over the top, a heavily morally almost bankrupt kind of stories. Sorry, and then those are great. Those are great. I just had to come back to the Kick-Ass universe because I'd been a fan before they turned it into a graphic novel.
Nice.
And Humble Bundle, which I every so often
take advantage
of, because you know it's a great little thing where they make comics and games and books available and all of the money at a discounted price, and then hit a certain threshold, and then all of the money goes to a specific charity. So that's always fun. And they had a Mark Miller sort of like blowout, and so I kind of went nuts and bought everything that Humble Bundle had to offer, and managed to catch up on, you know, the original Kick-Ass.
Okay.
I read the book 4 because in preparation for the series that Hit Girl had spun off all on her own.
I didn't realize she had her
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Kick-Ass is set in a world where heroes are still sort of being a thing, and this one guy Dave just decides to put on a costume and just try to be a hero because he had his ass handed to him, and he had a bunch of metal plates put in his face, and because of the terrible like mugging or whatever it was that he went through, can't feel pain as much. And that's always a plus when you're fighting crime, because if you're not afraid of getting hurt because you're not gonna feel hurt, then you're gonna take a couple of sticks and start sticking it back, and which is what Dave did. It just progresses to this whole thing, and sort of 4 is the culmination of this terrible crime family that's done terrible things, and Hit Girl and Dave have suffered losses, right? And that's sort of how that was. It's like, how do we close this saga, and what happens to Hit Girl afterwards? Obviously, spoilers, she lives because she has her own series. It's set after the Kick-Ass thing. What's great about the series is there's about 6 parts to it, and she goes all over the world. So it's basically Hit Girl vignettes in different countries. So you've got one in India, you've got one in Canada, there's Rome, etc., etc. And various authors, of course, the one that Mark Miller sort of wrote was pretty good, and then he sort of handed off. I mean, I think Kevin Smith did one of these. Mixed reviews. I have mixed feelings along with said reviews, because you just sort of it's like you can capture a character's voice, but maybe not necessarily the original author's sort of intent. Right, and you'll see, like anyone who's ever read the Animorphs and knows that past the 25th book, I think they started to have like ghostwriters just write so that they could just crank as many of them out like over the years. And again, character voice, kind of easy, but like the original feel to it, kind of not always. And so it was a hit and a miss, a hit and a miss, a hit and a miss, which is an ironic review for a title for a series called Hit Girl, because a lot of misses for this one. Okay. Which leads me to the last set of sort of series that I binged, which is Kick-Ass: The New Girl. I feel like this was written during the Trump era, because there were allusions to it and like travel bans and all that kind of stuff, or the like. I'm not sure there was a travel ban, but did that kind of political climate was sort of alluded to. Very tumultuous, because they just do that sometimes. Like there would be like allusions to like specific president regimes, and the story becomes a pastiche of that. So this is where that was that was set. There's a lady who was a former army sort of like special forces person. She decides to leave the army so that, you know, she can pursue her dreams, and her husband, who she's been, you know, giving money to, is going to take care of the kids. She comes home from deployment after a terrible mission, finds that her husband has left with somebody else. They are broke as all heck. They are in debt thanks to her soon-to-be ex-husband, and apparently her brother-in-law is working for the mob and offered her a job at the club, and she's like, yeah, that's a little crooked. Plot twist, she actually ends up getting involved and running the mob from the inside. That's the theory of so now there's like this weird sort of like violent Robin Hood, where instead of robbing from the rich and stealing from the poor, she took over the actual criminals and kept robbing the other criminals and giving stuff to the poor, whilst being like the most murderous kind of, and while putting on the green suit of Kick-Ass. So in my head I'm like, wow, I don't even know where to begin. And she's a woman of color as well. So in my head I'm just like, ooh, I don't know that this will age well in today's sort of environment of let's make the colored person the ambiguously moral one, as opposed to the white boy who put on the green suit and was the unequivocal, albeit dumb, kind of like clean cut, I am on the side of good here, versus she's like, I'm murdering criminals as a criminal. So to me, like, it's not for everybody. So that is that's the premise. There's no spin to it. So take it as you will. I certainly have to look at the climate today and go, I don't know that this is, I don't know that this will pass muster, because it's a little, you know, it's a little like, especially because the last thing we want is to demonize any community.
Yes, of course.
And she's the kingpin of crime. So I'm just reading through this and I'm just like, okay, interesting story, but also, female empowerment, yay. But also, why is she the one who's like the, and it's this whole, it gets weird. So read at your own risk. I don't know that they're heavily promoting it. And that's that. Anyway, speaking of badass women, because that's sort of what this binge is all about, right?
Apparently.
Because even if Dave was the main character of Kick-Ass, the original, it was always Hit Girl that was kind of the breakaway star. So let's talk about women who kill people. I started my Throne of Glass binge, and I gotta say, I don't know what happened between the first time I read Throne of Glass, and that was probably Assassin's Blade that changed everything. But
yes, because I think you started with Throne of Glass.
Because I started with Throne of Glass, and I just couldn't, like, I was just hanging on for dear life, and I don't even remember any of the things that I loved about Throne of Glass this second read through at all. None of it. I just remembered like just random like stuff.
Anyway.
So anyway, I binged the Assassin's Blade and Throne of Glass, I want to say in a weekend.
And you read it really fast.
In a weekend and in a couple of weekdays. I'm actually now almost done with Crown of Midnight, and I'm pretty sure that halfway through Assassin's Blade I was like, yeah, watch me just slide down this entire 9-book series very, very quickly. So again, I do not know what happened. I think it was the backstory. And I'm usually the kind of person who likes to read in publication order, because that's just me. I'm just that guy.
But it works better this way.
But good grief, Assassin's Blade humanizes and gives you an introduction to who and what Selena Sardothian is, who is the titular character, or the main character of the entire Throne of Glass series. She, at a very young age, suffered a tragedy and found herself at the mercy of the Assassin's Guild, led by Arabin Hamel, you know, and who has become sort of like a surrogate father, mentor, jailer, personal tyrant, you know, in her life. And what Assassin's Blade does for you that Throne of Glass doesn't is, you know, give you a backstory so that the person that you're looking at for the first time, because the first time you see, and this is the opening scene of Throne of Glass, so it's probably not too much of a spoiler, is you see the greatest assassin of Aderlin in the mines, in some kind of like, you know, like work prison camp. And there's just no way for you to like immediately, for me, my first experience of this, to root for her, because like, yeah, I don't know you, how'd you get here? And so it's a great mystery to unravel. How did the land's greatest assassin wind up in said camp? But when you start with Assassin's Blade and see that it wasn't always like that, that she did have a life. There was a period of training before she became, or eventually peaked as the greatest assassin the land has ever seen. And so I highly recommend Assassin's Blade. Actually, it's a collection of vignettes. There is no real sort of like overarching story. It's just a collection of short stories. But it gives you a glimpse into the life of...
well, I mean, there is one overarching detail in every single story.
Agreed. That's kind of spoiler.
Yeah, so we can't tell you what it is, but there is one thing.
Yeah, and so yeah, and by the way, I'm doing this reread along with Alexa and our friend Danica, because we are going to do several bookish breakdowns on the Throne of Glass series.
We'll see how far we can get.
And already the comments that are coming out of my mouth are, I hear, pleasing and wonderful to them. Not because my commentary is scintillating, but just because it's
very funny.
I just have so many thoughts, and you'll hear them eventually. But I recommend Assassin's Blade, and Throne of Glass I did not remember to be such a well-crafted book. I will say this once, and maybe forever. Sarah does not care when she writes books, and I love that. It's so refreshing to have an author who will just, ironically, in the same energy as her main character, just strong arm her way through wherever she wants the sort of like narrative to go, and I appreciate that so much. I mean, I've heard colorful commentary online of various degrees of vitriol about the series. I have not, myself encountered any such points just yet where I'm just like, oh, that was a little weird. But I did encounter many twists and turns where I'm just like, wow, looks like the author did that on purpose and she does not care. Like that's, and I'm talking about like emotional beats that just sort of get flung willy-nilly, but then you realize that was intentional. And I appreciate that. There's very little thought to, I wonder what the fans will, versus no, we're taking it in this direction. And I get
that's
it.
How the story is
and I love that about Sarah's books so far, because people are like that in real life. They will throw you for a loop. They will decide things. They will do things that you're just like, dude, you shouldn't, and yet they do. And that's just how people are, and that makes them more real. Problematic, sure, but aren't we all? And for Alexa to sort of just like sit here going, yeah, that's exactly.
Danik and I have to try so hard not to
spoil
anything.
Yeah, because I have so many comments.
Because there's like so many things we could say, and we're just like.
I'm actually in the process of creating in my head a cheesy 80s musical, jukebox musical of Throne of Glass. It's magnificent. I have like all of these power ballads in my head, and it's all gonna be cheesy, like, 80s acting where you shouldn't do that kind of thing. But it's great. Peter Cetera's in there. Piano in the Dark. It's obviously a song that is going to be there. Can't wait. I actually cannot wait to stop filming so I can
continue reading.
So I can finish Cry to Midnight and jump straight to the third book, which is going to be super awesome.
Yes,
so that's my
will be.
deal.
Okay, 2 more books. The first one is She Who Became the Sun, which is by Shelley Parker Chan. This came out in July. This one was pitched originally as Mulan meets Song of Achilles. And while I do see why they would choose those 2 as comp titles, I actually think that this is something that stands out all on its own and should be seen as such. So, at the very beginning of the book, you meet Zhu Chongba and his sister, and Zhu is told that he is going to have a fate of greatness, while the sister is told she will have a fate of nothingness. They get attacked by bandits, their family home is attacked by bandits, and the brother dies, but the sister lives. And she is determined to take on his fate and not hers, because she wants that fate of greatness. And so she takes on his identity and becomes Zhu Chongba. And the story follows her through her time, escaping to a monastery and then eventually getting involved in the war and politics that, her country is currently going through. Yeah. And this book was so interesting. The thing that I can see the most that is very similar to the Song of Achilles is the writing style. There is something about the way the narrative is written that it is very compelling, but it's also pretty detached, at least for me. I never felt like I was really connecting with any of these characters, but I was interested to see what would happen next in their story. I was sucked right into the world, and this is a thing that I guess I'm realizing that I'm more into now. It's like politics and war stories, because that is a lot of what makes up this book. Like, you just see how everything is woven together, like how one action causes a cascade of other actions, and it gives you the point of view of Zhu, but also of other people, either her opponents or the people supporting her in the story. And it's just so easy to get sucked right into it and to wonder how everything is going to end, because inevitably there's going to be some sort of confrontation, there's going to be some big sort of power play, and that's built up throughout the entire novel. So I thought it was really interesting. I was a little worried that I would find it hard to get into, because historical fantasy is not normally something that I feel like I can read very quickly, but this book was like, it just sucked me right in. I was like, okay, I guess I need to find out like what's going to happen next to this person, like what are they going to do and how is this going to end for them. And it is interesting just to see how this character goes from being impoverished and orphaned and becomes something else entirely by the end of the book. I think that's always a fun thing, and you kind of are rooting for them even if they're making decisions that aren't necessarily morally correct in any way. I mean, it's about survival, right? And it's about embracing whatever you need to do, being willing to do whatever you need to do to get the destiny that you think you deserve.
Right.
So, interesting stuff. There's obviously a lot of trigger warnings here because it's wartime, so there's a lot of murder, there's a lot of, starvation, violence. anything and everything related to that, it's a time. So be prepared for that going in, but it definitely is fascinating, and I am interested to see how the series will continue. We're gonna go from something that was a little heavy to something a little more wholesome. A YA contemporary called XOXO, which is by XOXO. This has a main character named Jenny. She is a cello prodigy, and she's really determined to, you know, pursue that as a career, pursue that for her college life. One night, she has a random encounter with a guy named Jay Woo, who comes to her uncle's karaoke bar in LA, and they end up having like this really fun, spontaneous night together. She just thinks she'll never see him again, like it was a one-off, it was fun. But then she and her mother end up having to move to Seoul temporarily to help out with her grandmother, and she enrolls at an art school there, only to encounter Jae-woo again, because he's a student at that school as well. It's also at that point where she realizes he's actually a member of the biggest K-pop band in the world,
There we go.
And this book was so delightful and wholesome. Like, I had so much fun reading it. I think I knew I was gonna enjoy it because I have enjoyed another book by Axie before, but I love that this one feels like a very, very well done version of the fanfic I used to read and write when I was younger. It's just such a fun concept to take a non-celebrity and put them in a romance with a celebrity, especially when it's like a big boy band type story. I enjoyed that tremendously, and I found the romance very swoony, and I liked seeing them work through their obstacles together. I also really enjoyed the fact that this is not just about the romance, it's also about Jenny, you know, sort of coming of age and realizing that maybe she doesn't have to be super hyper focused on the technical stuff, on the pursuit of the thing she wants. She doesn't have to give it up either, but she can also allow herself to have a bit of fun, to live her life a little and be a typical teen, and the friends and the people she meets in Seoul help her to come to terms with that. And it's just so wonderful, so wholesome. It definitely made me want to go to Seoul. It definitely appealed to the part of my heart that is very romantic and wanted a happy ending for this pair. I really, really enjoyed it. This is one of my favorite books that I've read this year just because it was so much fun and so delightful, and I genuinely think that this is the kind of book you should pick up if you're in the market for like a summery sort of YA contemporary romance read. Also, before I finish, I gotta show you the pre-order.
Oh, that's so cute.
Pre-order art card. So there is this art card that Axie has been sending, and it has the main cast of characters from XOXO, and I love it. It also kind of details like what kind of relationship they have on the card, which is so fun, and this is the back of the card. Anyway, those are all the books we're going to talk about for this particular What We Read episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you have thoughts on any of the books or graphic novels that we talked about, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, if you want to see more from us, you can like this video, you can subscribe to the channel, you can find us on all the other links down below, and we'll see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!